explain why all of the Conservatives walked out at one point?
Yeah, so after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and his NDP Liberal government, we're in a situation where even the NDP government in British Columbia has called for the Liberals to end the wacko decriminalization policy that they've implemented there that sees drugs like heroin, crack, cocaine, and all orders of illegal substances now being used on playgrounds, transit, coffee shop patios, and in hospitals. It's a situation where it's so wacko that nurses who work in hospitals are afraid of breastfeeding their babies when they go home because they're concerned about the crack smoke that they're being exposed to in British Columbia hospitals. So the leader of the official opposition raised the issue of this wacko policy and was ejected by the Liberal speaker for calling it exactly what it is. And so we're not going to stay in proceedings when there's two sets of rules. One set of rules for a Prime Minister who isn't asked to follow the same rules that the official opposition is. Our job is to ask questions and to hold the government accountable. It's not the job, of course, of the Speaker, because he's a Liberal, to protect a Prime Minister whose wacko policies are putting people's lives in danger. And now we know that the Liberals are considering the same policy. It's a wacko policy, but for the city of Toronto here in Ontario.
But Mr. Poilievre was asked to withdraw the comment, and he did not twice.
Yeah,
Why not? Why not, instead of having this situation where he was removed from the House, why not withdraw that comment?
Yeah, quite simply, Mr. Poilievre did withdraw the comment.
He replaced it. He did not withdraw it.
Well,
he said he replaced it, and
of course, the problem, Mike, is that the problem is that there's two sets of rules. There was a set of rules that was being applied to the leader of the official opposition, and there was a different set of rules being applied to the Prime Minister. And so Mr. Poilievre laid out very clearly that it's a wacko policy, and so it's for the Prime Minister to explain why he's letting that stand.
So what happens to the House of Commons? What happens to...
We're asking about the Speaker and the incident. Any thoughts on what happened? And any thoughts, Ms. Harder?
It's a very good word. Absolutely. How else would you define what the Liberals are doing? It 100% is. And the fact that the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada was thrown out of there for doing his exact job is shameful. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Ms. Ferreri, any thoughts on the Speaker's decision just now?
Just that he's a wacko.
Pour qualifier ce qu'on a vu tout à l'heure en chambre, c'est assez inhabituel.
C'est un geste historique de mon histoire à moi, personnelle. J'ai jamais vu ça. Mais quand notre chef se fait mettre dehors de la Chambre, on est solidaire avec lui. Si notre chef ne peut pas poser de questions, nous autres non plus ne peut pas en poser. Et demain, ça sera un autre jour, espérons-le.
Quand même, la règle voudrait que si le président lui dit de retirer ses propos, il devrait le faire. Est-ce que vous croyez que c'était la bonne chose pour lui de ne pas retirer ses propos?
Si on regarde les deux côtés, de la manière que ça s'est passé, il y a deux poids, deux mesures. Que le président a, devant sa propre conscience, un acte de compréhension à faire aux conservateurs.
Donc le président doit s'excuser d'après vous?
Il doit reviser ses politiques.
Monsieur Gourde, est-ce que je peux vous demander ça en anglais?
Non.
OK. Bonne journée.
What you witnessed in the House of Commons moments ago is a disgrace. It's a disrespect for our institutions, a disrespect for the Speaker. And let's just recap the last week. You have a leader of the opposition who proactively visits and cultivates the support of white nationalist extremist groups, people who have threatened wars on LGBTQ communities, who have threatened to gang rape female journalists. This is not normal. What is also not normal, and which we should not overlook, is that just yesterday, with a wink and a nod, the leader of the opposition threatened to tear up the Charter of Rights. So it is no surprise that now all jacked up on this very extreme rhetoric, the House of Commons turns into something quite unprecedented, where the opposition are asked repeatedly to withdraw their extremist language, refuse to do so, and when they're not permitted to continue with their extremist language, withdraw from the House. Donc ce que vous venez de voir, ce n'est pas normal. Nous avons un chef de l'opposition qui, revisons, dans la dernière semaine, a proactivement visité des extrémistes blancs, des gens qui ont menacé le viol en gang de journalistes féminins, qui ont menacé la communauté LGBTQ, qui font preuve d'un langage extrême. Hier, le chef de l'opposition, avec un petit clin d'œil, a menacé de déchirer la Charte des droits et libertés. Donc, on ne devrait pas s'étonner qu'il rentre, lui et sa gang, dans la Chambre des communes avec un langage survolté, excédentaire, et se laisse emporter dans les insultes, et, quelque chose de jamais vu, décide de se retirer de la Chambre des communes après avoir eu l'avertissement du président que ce n'était pas approprié leur langage. Donc, je me désole de ce non-respect de nos institutions, je me désole de ce non-respect de la Chambre des communes.
Est-ce que les libéraux n'ont pas contribué un peu à cette enflure tout à l'heure à la période des questions, à savoir qu'il était questionné, M. Trudeau, sur la question des drogues en Colombie-Britannique, il répliquait en parlant des fréquentations de M. Poilievre, etc. Est-ce que vous aussi, vous n'avez pas un rôle à jouer pour faire baisser la température?
Vous avez vu les insultes et le langage survolté et excédentaire dont a fait preuve le chef de l'opposition. Il parlait de tuer des gens. Il parlait de choses qu'on ne comprenait plus. Et je vous rappelle que ce ne sont pas nous qui avons été visiter des extrémistes blancs et avons cultivé l'appui de ces mêmes extrémistes blancs, des gens qui menacent et qui prônent la violence domestique dans nos rues contre des groupes minoritaires. Donc, évidemment, je fais un appel au calme et je fais un appel au Parti conservateur de, s'il vous plaît, retrouver le chemin de la normalité. Je vous rappelle ici, là, ce n'est pas normal ce que vous voyez. Et il faut éviter de banaliser la chose. Il faut éviter de banaliser ce qui se passe tout de suite. Nous avons un langage extrême et évidemment, j'espère que le retour au calme va être retrouvé.
Mais vous ne l'avez pas alimenté.
Expect things to return to calm after you just kicked out the political opposition leader, who's way more popular than you guys in opinion polls right now.
I want to recap that the leader of the opposition has used extreme language, has used sayings and slogans that we have never seen before in Canada. We have never experienced before in Canada this level of extreme right-wing rhetoric. And I would just say to all of you and to all Canadians that it is not normal what we are seeing. And we have to avoid making this seem banal or some sort of normal part of political back and forth. This is not what that is. This is violent rhetoric. This is extreme rhetoric. And this is rhetoric that must absolutely no longer be in our politics.
What did you make of this slight retraction?
Which slight retraction?
When Pierre Poilievre changed his wording.
Well, that's not what he was asked to do by the Speaker, who's elected by all of us to apply the rules and apply them evenly. And we urge the Speaker to continue to apply the rules and to apply them to all members of the House.
Vous ne pensez pas que vous avez alimenté par vos attaques, vous aussi, partisanes, ce qui s'est passé tout à l'heure?
Vous avez été là, M. Blouin, à écouter les mêmes questions que moi. Vous avez vu et observé le langage excédentaire et extrémiste dont fait preuve et dont utilise le chef de l'opposition. Donc, je répète, il ne faut pas banaliser cette situation-là. Il faut analyser son langage. Il faut analyser ce qu'il dit, ce chef de l'opposition. Ça n'a jamais été vu au Canada. C'est extrême, c'est extrémiste, et on doit absolument le dénoncer.
You're saying his speech was extreme and violent. What part of it was extreme and violent? He said wacko. Is that what you're saying is extreme and violent?
You were there for the same question period as me. He basically accused the Prime Minister of having policies to murder people and to have people die. That is after a week, I think you missed the first part of this, where he's cultivating the violent, extreme white nationalist right, where yesterday, with a wink and a nod, he's threatening to rip up our Constitution and our charter rights. So this is not normal, and I would ask and urge us all to not normalize this. This is not banal what's going on.
Mais est-ce que le président va être capable de garder le contrôle demain, par exemple? Ça annonce quoi?
Je laisse au président, évidemment, on a élu ce président, on lui demande évidemment d'appliquer les règles. C'est ce qu'il a fait aujourd'hui et c'est ce que j'espère qu'il continuera de faire.
It's very likely he or at least some members of his party are going to come out in a few minutes and accuse you guys of tyranny. How would you respond to that?
I would say that that is not normal language. We are in a democracy. We are participating every day here in a democratic exercise. We're voting on budgets. We're passing laws. We're debating them in a completely conventional way. The language being applied to situations in Canada is not normal. These people find advantage, somehow, for some reason, in getting people all jacked up. This leader of the opposition is using terms and terminology that should not be part of our discourse, and we should not normalize it. Thank you very much.
To a point where you can bring Parliament back to a functioning state. Right now, it is not functioning. What is
what's not functioning about it? What is not functioning is that the Conservatives...
But what part of this, what part responsibility do you guys take on the government benches for letting it get to this state, and how do you get it back to a place where Canadians can look at Parliament and say, that works?
I would say to you that any objective analysis of this situation, would take you to the extreme terminology and language and tactics that are being used by the right wing in this country and that have unfortunately been imported into this chamber by Conservatives in this country. This is violent rhetoric. This is damaging rhetoric. This is meant to provoke extreme reactions. And we hope that the Conservatives come back to normal. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I couldn't help but notice a refreshing change in the House of Commons this afternoon. For once, there was would seem to be a unanimous consent that climate change exists and that we ought to help people in need. The civil discourse was certainly difficult to not appreciate towards the end of question period there, but sadly, it was as a result of a tantrum and a remarkable unwillingness to call out far-right extremism and to denounce Diagolon and to denounce an endorsement from Alex Jones in the United States, somebody who has lied for years about parents who have had to go through the most horrific thing that any parent would ever have to go through, is the death of their children. Pierre Poilievre has demonstrated contempt for Parliament. He's demonstrated that he, certainly likes to dish it out, but when anybody brings up something that he's been up to lately that is, quite frankly, disgraceful, and he should take accountability for that, he's summoned his entire caucus out of the room, which is certainly not emblematic of a government in waiting. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any on this very remarkable question period today.
What do you think this does to the tenor of the House going forward? We're kind of towards the end of the sitting days.
Well, we've got 6 or 7 weeks left. There's a lot of work to be done, and I came to this House because I believe there's good ideas on the right, and I believe there's good ideas on the left, and I believe that if we work together and form consensus views and collaborate on key issues to support Canadians, then we'll have a stronger country. But one way that we will not have a stronger country is if we lean into the ugliest factions of our country. If we lean in on, people who really need a little bit of support, maybe we need to reach out to some of those folks who are really struggling with mis and disinformation. But then there's some folks out there who are demonstrating clearly racist, intolerant ideology that needs to be called out by every member in the House of Commons. And for the Conservatives and for Pierre Poilievre just to refuse to denounce far-right extremism on behalf of these organizations that have been referred to by security experts and Canadian intelligence as far-right extremists who it's just going to lead to more violence and disinformation and distrust in our institutions. So once again, I'll call on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to denounce these far-right extremist groups. It shouldn't be that hard to do.
Why do you think every party is resorting to name-calling at the moment?
Well, I'll say that it's unfortunate. I'll also acknowledge that I've used words in the House of Commons that later, upon reflection, I shouldn't have. The temperature in there is high, it's hot, and people are, resorting to childhood, tactics and name-calling, which I think we all ought to just take a beat and recognize we can be a lot better, and Canadians are watching. I saw a lot of young people up in the gallery today, and I reflected on how democracy seems to be functioning from their position. I was in a grade 4, 5, and 6 class last Friday, Martin Street Public School in Milton, and those kids asked great questions. They had good ideas. They made
saying that he's being censored by the Liberal speaker. You guys are saying he's courting far-right extremists. How do you restore some level of calm to Parliament right now? It feels like everyone's getting more polarized.
I don't think it's too much to ask a leader of an official party in Canada to denounce far-right extremism and a group who has been identified by Canadian security and intelligence as a terrorism organization. That's not too much to ask. I have a lot of Conservative friends. They're not far-right ideologues. They're not racist. They are not extremist. Conservatives deserve to have somebody who they feel represent their views, and whatever those views might be. I can guarantee that the vast majority of Canadian Conservatives do not consider themselves far-right, racist, extremist ideologues, and that's exactly who Diagolon is. That's exactly who Pierre Poilievre is unfortunately courting. He went out of his way to visit and sit down with this organization. That is absolutely disgraceful, and it needs to be called out.
If it's not popular actions, then why are the Conservatives polling so well right now?
Look, all I know is that Pierre Poilievre is spending his free time in between sitting weeks courting far-right ideologues and spending time with organizations who Canadian intelligence have referred to as terrorist groups. That is absolutely disgraceful. It needs to be called out plain and simple that no political party should be meeting with these organizations and courting their support.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You want to hear me on this as well? I want to talk about this first, though. I mean, this is something that we haven't seen, I think, in our tenure. Is extremely rare occurrence to see someone get kicked out of the House of Commons, the leader of the opposition. I think Canadians see that this is a guy with very, very thin skin, and he never apologizes for anything. I think in a normal person looking at the situation that he got into in the Maritimes would say, I messed up, I shouldn't have met with these people. Look at Canadians if you're looking to lead them and say, I'm sorry. I mean, this is a group of people associated with folks who made deep insults to his family and his wife. If I had done that, I'd be on the couch for 3 months. And so he needs to take a look at himself and look at, I'm not accusing Pierre Poilievre of being a racist, I'm not accusing him of being an extremist, but he plays footsies with them and he dances with them. So I think Canadians need to see that and see him for who he is, because I think it's quite dangerous, and it isn't dignified, it isn't something that should be in a person that is supposed to lead, at least in his riding, regardless of the party that you're with. And so what the Speaker did today was a good thing, and I hope it doesn't happen again. I hope the guy learns how to be a little more remorseful for something that's just a dumb thing, and he keeps doing dumb things. So Canadians will see that, and I think they'll need to call it out.
Do you think what happened today is going to fuel the narrative that he's being silenced by the Liberals?
Who's being silenced?
Pierre.
That guy's never shut his mouth in his life. Who silences him? He keeps saying dumb things. I think it would be good if he shut up. He shut his yap once in a while. But the stuff that he does in the House of Commons is disgraceful. But he plays on that. He's a guy that likes to play outside the lines. When someone steps out the lines to confront him, he freezes. So that's the guy people are in bed with.
In Budget 2024, you have a lot of new measures about immigration. Today there was more measures announced. Are any of those measures going to propose today make it more difficult for people to claim asylum in Canada?
Sorry, what's the last part of your question?
Are any of the measures today that were shown in that 40-page document going to make it more difficult for people to claim asylum in Canada?
You know, I think some of the measures that they are mostly public safety related. They are efficiencies within the system that I think we can take a look at. They obviously have to follow due process and what we hold up high as an efficient immigration system. We want to streamline the process. There are matters that we think are duplicative, and I think we'll stand by them. They will need obviously scrutiny from the House. I think what What will help with due process principally is the investments of about $750 million to ensure equity in the processing times, which have jumped, obviously, because of the flow of asylum seekers coming to Canada, other countries around the world in similar situations as well. So that will help. Nothing overnight, but it's stuff that we need to do because this is a system that does have backlogs. I think the biggest impact on due process is actually the lag in time that has jumped recently because of the flow.
When you talk about streamlining processes, there's a line that says you're going to streamline deportations for people whose claims have been denied. How are you going to do that when there is such a backlog right now, and it does take years for people to get?
Yeah. Well, I think, frankly, there are people that are not entitled to be in this country. They have received due process upon due process, and it still takes time. Recognizing that is one thing, but acting on that is another. I think this is a step in the latter direction. Again, this is always in a context of fairness and due process. We always look at the system in the way we can improve it. It has challenges. It has matters that impact the time between someone gets to the country, gets assessed either positively or negatively, and then is asked to leave or is forced to leave, and those times are too long in some places.
Certainly they're too long. Are you willing to put any targets or goals in place for the timeline that you'd like those to happen within?
No, not yet. They need to be quicker. They need to be more efficient, and I think that's why we rely on feedback from the Immigration Refugee Board, which is not a wing of the Canadian government. It is a judicial institution, and we listen to them when they say what is it that they need to make claims faster, more efficient, and as well as public safety and the processes they follow in order to remove people when they are no longer welcome in this country and choose not to leave alone.
So just going back to what happened today, I know you said the opposition leader never shuts his mouth. He is tweeting that he's been censored by the Liberal speaker.
It's a weird form of censorship to be able to tweet you're being censored. He was not. He was sanctioned by the leader for the unparliamentary conduct that is long-standing in Parliament. So he's creating his own narrative. He's been very successful at that. It just does not match reality.
Do you think the government has any responsibility in trying to bring down the polarization currently happening in Parliament?
Absolutely, but the first way to bring down polarization is not to play footsie with extremists. And when that happens, we need to point it out. People say, oh, it's just Pierre hanging out with his base. It's a little more insidious than that. And these are people that, look, these are people that don't respect anyone. They don't respect him. They think he's a dweeb as well. So, I think there's something that needs to be reckoned with. He has an incessant need to get affirmation and confirmation for any person that supports some of his views, and he goes and gets them with anyone. There's some people whose vote I don't want. I really don't, Rafi, and it's not something they can go vote for someone else. But it's based on my principles, and it's based on healthy debate. So, yes, the government has a role in bringing people together. We absolutely do. But when we see egregious behavior that was properly sanctioned by the House, we also need to call it out.
What is that role the government has to bring down the temperature of partisan debate?
Well, again, it depends on the issue. There's no way I'm going to brush extremism, whether it's anti-Semitic, anti-Islamophobic hate speech, under the carpet. I'm not going to let it by. We need to have a place for healthy debate, but as you've seen in the House of Commons, it's far more often than not recently been rather unhealthy. And the fact that they were quite thin-skinned and they picked up their marbles and left the House is a sign of who they are as a party. You're in the House as, yes, leader of the opposition, Prime Minister, but we're all equal. We are representing our ridings. The rest of the party didn't need to leave today, but their bread is buttered by Pierre Poilievre, and none of them had the courage to stay and ask questions of the government, which is very much a privileged time for people in Canada. It's something that we're quite proud of as a country. In the U.S., Congress can't bring in people, the executive, Mr. Biden's executive and cabinet, to question them on a daily basis. In Canada, I think it's pretty special based on this Westphalia, based on the parliamentary tradition that we have, that you can drag in the executive and ask them questions every day. They held their breath, picked up their marbles, and walked out of the House. That's a sign of character.
You're calling them thin-skinned, but won't some Canadians look at this and see that, well, he was ejected for using the word wacko? That's not an astoundingly offensive word.
It's been, look, there are plenty of unparliamentary words that are used. They may seem arcane and archaic. I have been guilty of using them myself. When I've done it, I've gotten up and apologized. So he wasn't sanctioned for using the word. He was sanctioned for not retracting it. And when he did, he was a big baby, and for about 3 or 4 rounds, he played words in order to not apologize. And I think that is telling of a character of a person. So he used the words, wrong on him. He then was sanctioned, refused to apologize. That attacks the integrity and the authority of the chair, which is sacrosanct in this House. Thank you, guys.
So I just wanted to comment on what happened just in the House. Obviously, it's very disappointing. The House of Commons is a place for open dialogue and debate. And today, we saw the real colors of Pierre Poilievre when he was confronted with something that happened last week, where he essentially met with extremist, white supremacist, and he hasn't taken ownership of it. He hasn't accounted for it. He hasn't apologized. I really do think this puts a lot of Canadians at unrest, because for many racialized people, what the encounter represents is something that's deeply troubling, that speaks to the othering of Canada. And I think as a national leader, there's a responsibility for Pierre Poilievre to take ownership, and it's very disappointing he just walked away. So did his caucus, and it doesn't really speak well for the democratic traditions that we're used to here.
You're talking about Pierre Poilievre's meetings that you're saying are controversial. Peel police chief had controversial meetings in Sri Lanka with a person who was found to be torturing 2 weeks earlier. Any thoughts on that?
Look, I can speak about that at some other time. I think there's, right now, what's critical to understand is that Pierre Poilievre is someone who walked away from controversy when he was challenged, and it is not, it's not consistent with the role that he plays. With respect to what happens in Sri Lanka, I speak about it extensively. Canada is not Sri Lanka. Canadian parliamentary system is not the Sri Lankan parliamentary system. So I think there's a definite need to understand the difference, and the democratic values that we espouse requires proper, thoughtful debate amongst peers who are from different parties, and that's what Parliament represents. We had 3 other political parties that, 4 parties in fact, continued question period, and that is very, very important, because this is the way that governments are held to account, and the question period is for members to ask those questions. And sadly, I think Pierre Poilievre walked away when he was targeted, when he was when we questioned his integrity.
With respect, Tamil Canadians are asking for an apology from that police chief. Do you think that there should be an apology for that meeting?
I will leave it to the chief to respond to that.
The Conservatives are saying the Speaker's been unduly harsh towards them. Do you believe the Speaker could have in any way been operating along partisan lines?
Look, my sense is that there was a need for decorum in the House. Over the last several months, it's very clear, sitting through a question period virtually every day, that the tone and tenor of question period is oftentimes very difficult, because it speaks to the toxicity that exists within the Conservative Party and the questions that's posed. There are some real issues that Canadians are facing today. For example, the drug crisis is one of them. And to trivialize and to really narrow that into simplistic arguments is not what we need. We need an adult conversation about decriminalization and what's happening in British Columbia and in communities across Canada. It cannot be resolved with slogans. So what we saw today, I believe, is a moment where a leader of the opposition just walked away from a very difficult question that he had to answer. He refused to walk away, and now he's tweeting out random thoughts that really doesn't speak to the reality of what happened today in Parliament.
That heat and toxicity, as you say, you felt while sitting in question period, do you feel that has grown over the last 6 months, year?
You know, I go back to Arnold Chan, right? So I don't know if you were there when Arnold Chan did his last speech in Parliament. I think it was in June of 2017, and he talked about the need for civility and the need for people to get together. You know, Parliament is comprised of 338 Canadians from all walks of life. I personally like to think that I have really good relationships with people from all parties, including the Conservative Party. And I think what's missing right now is that when we're in Parliament, we're here to do good for Canadians. We're not here to pull each other down. There is a need to hold governments to account, and that is an absolute responsibility of an opposition party, and I really urge the opposition to do that. But I think to trivialize issues of life and death in a way that simplifies it and really doesn't speak to, you know, what's happening on our streets, I think it's irresponsible. And if you look at the toxicity around that, that is not the Prime Minister's fault. It is something that we're working with the province of British Columbia and others. So to blame certain things on one individual, I think is completely unfair. And the debate needs to be elevated to a point where we talk about actual solutions. Thank you.
I'll ask you a different question. We've seen military complaints going up, even though they're not doing the criminal sexual assault anymore in that system, but we've seen a number of complaints go up. Do you have any comment on that?
One of the things that I think is very important is the work of the Military Complaints Commission is, I think, facilitating and making sure that members have a voice. And I think it's really important. Quite frankly, I would always be concerned about an increase in complaints, but we want to encourage people to feel comfortable bringing their concerns forward, and I want them to be assured that their concerns will be taken seriously, that action will be taken, and so I think initially we would see an increase in those complaints, but we are also making sure that every member of the Canadian Armed Forces know that they work in a supportive, safe, and respectful environment, and part of that is making sure that we respond to any concerns that they may bring forward.
How concerned are you that they're going up, though? You said you would be concerned. What level of concern are you at?
Well, again, I've also taken the opportunity, sometimes with the Chief of Defence, sometimes on my own. I've gone to bases across the country. I've had the opportunity to actually sit down in town halls and in discussions with members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We've talked about some of the challenges they face in serving their country. I think it's one of the most noble choices that any Canadian can make, to choose to serve in our armed forces, to defend our country, and at the same time, we understand that service can cause some challenges to them in their life with respect to housing and access to childcare. It can be challenging because of the various deployments and training that they undertake for families, and we've got to make sure, and it's important to sit and listen to them about their experience and to ask them how we can help. And I've heard from, for example, some very legitimate concerns about access to housing. And so we're working on a number of initiatives right across the country, military bases, in order to ensure that our members have access to affordable housing so that they don't have that concern and burden when they are deployed or when they move. Similarly for their families. And they've talked to us about family health care. They've talked about employment for their spouses. They've talked to us about access to child care. Those are all things that I'm actually quite grateful that they bring forward. And at the same time, they're proud of the work that they're doing. They're proud of their service. We're going to do everything we can to support them.
Respectfully, I don't think you said whether you were concerned or not. I'm not sure you answered the question. Are you concerned?
I'm always concerned when any member has a complaint to bring forward. I think we have a very effective grievance process. I met just yesterday with people from our grievance committee. I think it's very important that we have those mechanisms in place. And again, I'm proud to be part of an organization. I'm proud to be the minister responsible for an organization that has put those mechanisms in place, has extraordinary, dedicated people who listen to those complaints, work very diligently to resolve those grievances when they come up forward. We all have a responsibility to support the men and the women of the Canadian Armed Forces. I will always share their concerns, and at the same time, I'm committed to making sure that we respond in an appropriate way.
What do you make of what transpired during a question period today in the House?
I think it was a little bit of unnecessary theater, but quite frankly, the language was clearly inappropriate, and I think what the decision that the Speaker was forced to make was the appropriate one. I also have concerns, quite frankly, with any parliamentarian. We have had, I think, some very difficult experiences in this country, and I've seen it around the world, with ideologically motivated extremist groups. And I think we should all be very careful with any action that might appear to legitimize the extremists of their ideologies. And I think it is important that every member of Parliament be diligent in not either intentionally or inadvertently promoting those groups, because frankly they are hateful. They are potentially a serious risk to many vulnerable people in this country. Thank you all very much.
Ce que vous avez vu à la période des questions tout à l'heure, M. Poilievre qui a refusé de retirer ses propos. La question qu'on peut se poser quand on regarde tout ça, est-ce que les libéraux n'ont pas un peu contribué à l'enflure, à faire monter la température tout à l'heure? Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
C'est parce que c'est simple. Si tu veux pas que ça prenne de l'ampleur, cette histoire-là, tu te dissocies des groupes d'extrême droite. C'est la chose la plus facile à faire, de se dissocier des groupes qui prônent la suprématie blanche au Canada. Donc, quand tu étais capable de le faire, ça démontre qui tu es et en quoi tu crois.
Et est-ce que vous craignez pour le climat au Parlement? Parce qu'on regarde ça, on se dit demain, comment le président va-t-il garder le contrôle,
pour les gens qui ont regardé la période de questions aujourd'hui, quand les conservateurs ont quitté, tout d'un coup, on s'est mis à avoir des vrais débats. Tout d'un coup, on s'est mis à avoir des questions avec de la substance au lieu de seulement des slogans. Et tout d'un coup, on a pu aborder les vrais enjeux qui touchent les Canadiens partout à travers le pays. Il y a un parti ici qui fait de la politique pour diviser les gens, puis c'est le Parti conservateur, puis on en a eu la preuve encore aujourd'hui à la période de questions.
What happened in the House of Commons, and do you think that we can get to a place where civility is restored? Because it seems like it's lacking right now, or at least there's an issue, obviously, in the House.
I think it's exactly the way Mr. Poilievre and his group want it to be. They continue to say that, Canada is in terrible shape and the rest of it. So an attack on how the civility is in the House, so we can't even run it. Actually, after they left, we had a great question period. Everybody was respectful of each other, as it should be.
What do you think happens tomorrow with question period?
I think Mr. Poilievre should come into question period and sit down and behave himself as what Canadians expect him to be. He's touting himself as the next leader. Well, he needs to show it, and he certainly wasn't showing it today.
Thank you.
Any thoughts on the Speaker's ruling?
Well, the Speaker is doing his job. Plenty of opportunity for the Conservatives to rescind their statements and to withdraw them, and he made his ruling, and that's what the Speaker is there to do.
Do you think radical is a fair comment, or is that unparliamentary?
You know what? The Speaker makes their decisions, and he consults with his table officers, and he made his decision, and I've been here for 3 terms now, and I respect all decisions, regardless if they're in favor of my party or not.
And where does this put the House of Commons? What's going to happen tomorrow when everyone comes back?
Well, that's a question you'll have to ask the Conservatives. I show up for work every day. That's the people who say they voted for me to show up every day, to participate in question periods in Parliament, and we'll continue to.
For decorum, though.
Decorum is really important. That's how we get things done. And you notice that both the questions and the answers today, after the Speaker's ruling, certainly were very clear in a very democratic way, and it behooves, I believe, the opposition members to conduct themselves in a way that allows democracy to continue. We can never abandon democracy. We must continue to work towards, common goals for the betterment of Canadians. So that's our job, and it's okay to disagree, but we have to have decorum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Épouvantable. On a vu qu'est-ce qui est, M. Poilievre. On a déjà vu qu'il voulait brûler les services. Il veut brûler la Constitution. Il a parlé de ça hier et aujourd'hui, il veut brûler le Parlement. On a vu ça. Pierre Poilievre, il s'agit de la pyromanie. De refuser simplement d'accepter une directive qui vient de notre présidente, qui est élue par tous les députés. C'est épouvantable. Il est en train de se révéler pour qu'est-ce qu'il est comme personne. Et je ne pense pas que les gens vont l'admirer pour qu'est-ce qu'il a fait aujourd'hui. Mr. Poilievre seems to want to burn everything down. He wants to burn down services. He talked yesterday about simply eliminating parts of the Constitution, deciding himself what applies in terms of constitutionality, and today showing profound disrespect for Parliament and for Canadians who elect us to Parliament to get a job done. He refused to simply respond to what is a very normal direction from the Speaker, elected by all parliamentarians. I've seen it myself. I've withdrawn myself comments that have been inappropriate. He made an inappropriate comment and refused to withdraw it. He seems to want to burn everything down. It's a pyromaniac Poilievre. And for him to do this today, I think, is incredible. It shows incredible discredit and disrespect for the parliamentary institutions that Canadians believe in. And I'm saddened by his actions today.
Do you think his comments were extremist or violent, as Mr. MacKinnon alluded earlier?
I thought his actions were disrespectful for Parliament. I think his actions in meeting with white supremacist groups is profoundly extremist and disquieting, I think, for all Canadians. His actions today are inexcusable, and there's no way.
La période des questions, précisément, est-ce que quelque chose qu'il a dit en particulier, est-ce que c'était le terme wacko ou est-ce que c'était avant, quand il disait que le premier ministre avait des politiques qui tuent les gens, etc.? Qu'est-ce qui était inacceptable, d'après vous, dans les propos?
Mais parfois, on est enflammé, puis on dit des choses qui ne sont pas acceptables. C'était très clair que c'était inacceptable. Ce qui n'est pas normal, c'est de refuser quand le président lui demande simplement de retirer ses propos. C'est une chose normale qui se passe tous les jours ici en Parlement. Moi, je l'ai fait moi-même. J'étais obligé de retirer mes propos. Le fait qu'il ait refusé à plusieurs reprises, c'est ça qui démontre un manque de respect total pour les Canadiennes et les Canadiennes et pour notre système démocratique. Il n'est pas roi. Il devrait être soustrait au même règlement de procédure que tout le monde a dans ce Parlement. Et pour lui de dire, mais là, moi, je suis au-dessus de la loi, je trouve ça extrêmement inquiétant.
Ça nous annonce quoi pour la suite?
Mais là, il est obligé de retirer pour la journée. On va voir demain.
Chez moi, l'élection qui s'en vient, est-ce que ça vous inquiète de voir le ton aussi enflammé?
Mais il faut dire le ton des conservateurs, le fait que M. Poilievre est prêt de rencontrer des extrémistes, des suprémacistes blancs, des misogynes, ça c'est inquiétant de loin. Mais je pense aussi que les Canadiennes et les Canadiens commencent à voir M. Poilievre pour qui il est. Et ça, c'est un autre exemple aujourd'hui.
Do you think that calling him a pyromaniac could also be seen as extreme? Don't you think that parliamentarians use inflammatory language all the time, like you just did, calling him a pyromaniac?
And if I did that in the House, the Speaker would call me to order and I would withdraw.
But it's okay if you not do it in the hallway.
There are rules in Parliament that must be followed, and he has not followed them, and he did not respect the authority of the Speaker. The Speaker is elected by all members of Parliament. It's the foundation of our parliamentary system, of our democracy. We elect a Speaker. It's the first act of a new Parliament. And so electing the Speaker is the person that we then put in charge of assuring that all of our procedures, all of our standing orders are strictly upheld. Otherwise, it's chaos in the House of Commons. And so what the Speaker did is very normal. The Speaker asked a withdrawal. We see this happen regularly in Parliament. This is a rare time when a member of Parliament has simply refused to heed the direction of the Speaker.
Mr. Singh has also been kicked out.
How much of this is about social media, ammunition for social media and fundraising on the part of the Conservatives?
I think a lot of this is about Conservatives trying to fundraise off hot-button issues. This is Parliament, though. This is our democracy. The federal government has a profound influence, good or bad, in the lives of people. And the reason why Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have been approaching this as adults in the room, fighting for pharmacare, fighting for dental care, fighting for affordable housing, fighting for anti-scab legislation, is because we believe the role of Parliament is to build people up. Mr. Poilievre seems to believe the role of the Conservative Party is to tear people down and tear our institutions down, and I profoundly regret his approach.
Mr. Singh was ejected from the House of Commons in 2020 when he was fighting over calling another member racist. Do you think this circumstance is different from what happened to Mr. Singh in 2020?
When that happened with Mr. Singh, we continued our work in the House, and we continued to do our work on behalf of Canadians. In this case, you saw the entire Conservative caucus simply walked out. They had questions that they could have asked. They chose not to. I think it shows a level of disrespect for Parliament that I have not seen in my 20 years on the Hill.
What the Conservative MPs were accusing the Speaker of was treating them unfairly, shutting them down too harshly. Do you see any merit in that? Is it possible that Mr. Fergus was being one-sided there?
I think Mr. Fergus is doing the same thing to any members of Parliament. I was asked just a few days ago to withdraw my remarks. I did not confront the Speaker. I did not challenge the Speaker. I understand that the Speaker's role is to uphold the standing orders and our procedures on behalf of all Canadians. We need to have a Parliament where people treat each other with respect. I don't deny that occasionally we go off and we say things that we should not say in the House of Commons. We have a responsibility to follow the directives of the person who upholds our standing orders and our procedures. And this is what I find disquieting about today, is when Mr. Poilievre chose to confront the Speaker rather than doing the right thing, the honourable thing, and withdrawing.
Why does it become so heated now? This week, today, it does seem that this is particularly heated relative to what it's been in the last few years, really. Why do you think it is right now?
I'm not going to speculate. I know how we approach our work, and how we approach our work is to build people up. Well, how we approach our work is to get legislation through, building on pharmacare, building on dental care, building on affordable housing and anti-scab legislation, building on things that will help Canadians. I don't know what motivates Conservatives aside from fundraising, and I haven't seen any sign in this House that they are actually trying to do anything, accomplish anything on behalf of Canadians. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Okay. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce qui s'est passé? Est-ce que vous craignez pour la tenue du débat public au Parlement canadien?
Bien, on a vu aujourd'hui c'est qui étaient des adultes qui, avec la dignité de représenter leurs concitoyens, puis ceux qui veulent faire un cirque de cet endroit. Avec une question de base, somme toute très simple. Est-ce que vous vous dissociez d'un groupe de suprémacistes blancs? Pierre Poilievre, le chef des conservateurs, est incapable de le faire. Après ça, il sombre dans l'injure puis dans l'insulte. Il refuse de retirer ses propos. Puis ensuite de ça, ils sortent boudés dans leur coin. C'est un show de boucan. Je pense que c'est indigne du Parlement fédéral. Puis je pense que les gens vont être capables de juger à la maison.
Est-ce que vous n'avez pas l'impression que tous les partis contribuent un peu à cette atmosphère-là au Parlement canadien?
Vous savez, ça commence à faire quelques années que je suis ici, là, puis je suis capable de poser des questions qui sont dures, je suis capable de hausser le ton, je suis capable de mettre le poing sur la table. Mais il y a une différence entre ça puis insulter les gens, pas capable de retirer ses propos, puis en plus de ça, même pas être capable de se retirer de groupes racistes ou suprémacistes blancs. Ça montre le vrai visage de Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Boulerice, I just want to ask you in English. You've been here for a while.
Yeah, too long.
Are we? Where would you say where would you say the political discourse is right now in this country in the House of Commons?
You can see the division, you can see the insults, you can see the Conservatives not being able to dissociate themselves from racist and white supremacist groups. I never saw that. And after that, they insult people, and after that, when they have to withdraw their words, they can't, and they leave the place. This is not, being an adult in the room. This is not somebody who can be the Prime Minister.
What happens tomorrow when question period is supposed to resume?
Frankly, I'm a little bit afraid, and I hope that the Conservatives will act like an official opposition here in the Canadian Parliament. But we cannot have that every day.
Is calling someone a radical fair comment, or is that unparliamentary?
It's a political term. Being treated as a radical, I've been there. It's okay with the political game. To say that the Prime Minister is a wacko, that's different.
But he did retract that, no?
He didn't retract that. That's the point. He was not able to retract that, and he want to replace it with another word. It's a game, and he knows that you cannot do that.
Que vous auriez un commentaire avec ce qu'on a vu au Parlement tout à l'heure? Comment qualifier l'attitude de M. Poilievre et celle du président aussi qui a décidé de l'expulser?
Bien, le président, c'est l'autorité dans la Chambre. Il a le droit de prendre les décisions qu'il prend. Maintenant, si le gros bon sens, c'est d'être incapable de condamner un groupe de suprémacistes blancs, puis après ça, de sortir parce qu'on est fâché puis qu'on n'a aucune réponse à donner, moi, je trouve que c'est un manque de respect envers les citoyens des circonscriptions qui sont représentés par les conservateurs, qui auraient aimé ça que leurs députés posent des questions aujourd'hui au gouvernement. Et ce qu'on a vu, c'est des gens qui se sauvent en courant parce qu'ils n'ont aucune réponse à donner puis qui sont fâchés, ils font un show de boucan, un effet de toge. Puis en gros, si j'étais à la place des députés conservateurs du caucus du Québec, je serais gêné aujourd'hui.